Just for a bit of fun, I thought I would entitle this short talk on Art Nouveau, bouillon and brasseries in Paris. Did Oscar eat here? Remember that after he was let out of prison, after serving 2 years hard time, that's 1895 to 1897, he spent many of his last years in Paris. In fact, eventually dying there at the end of 1900. So this is pure speculation, though there is one restaurant we're going to look at right at the end that does indeed claim that Oscar ate there regularly. But I'm going to start with two of my favorites. My husband, Scott, bought us a guide to Art Nouveau and Art Deco brasseries in Paris about 10 years ago, and we've been trying to work our way through them ever since. One of the problems is we have to return to our favorites. So my favorite is Julien's, which you can see here on the right-hand side. I think it's my favorite because of the Art Nouveau Alphonse Mucha style ladies. And Scott's favorite was known as Montparnasse 1900, but it has returned to its original name, Chartier, bouillon Chartier. I'll explain what a bouillon is in un moment. So one of the reasons that I've always been interested in Art Nouveau restaurants is that they were very much art for the people. Here's one that I fantasize visiting. It was known as the Café Bleu. It was created for Paris 1900, which had, given that Art Nouveau is at the height of its popularity, far fewer Art Nouveau buildings than you might imagine. But cafes, restaurants and shops often opted for the Art Nouveau style. It was a form of advertising. It encouraged you to go into a palace of tea and coffee drinking. There was often a ladies' room. There was frequently a gentleman's room for smoking, perhaps a billiards room. It was more an entertainment and leisure centre than a tea or coffee shop as we would now think of it. The architect of this is the wonderfully named Sarrier-Bovy. He's actually from Belgium, but like many, he found fame and fortune largely in Paris, where, as you can see, he had a interior design enterprise, which you can see the advert at the top, as it offered, as you can see, all sorts of things to improve your interior, cabinets, furniture of all descriptions. He would create for you a tout ensemble, a classic concept of the Art Nouveau era is, of course, the interior as a total work of art. I'm showing you a piece of his furniture down the bottom. It's very curvy, linear, but it's quite restrained. Sarrier-Bovy was influenced on the one hand by William Morris and on the other by Japan. And my advert for it down the bottom shows you indeed it was coloured blue, hence its nickname, of course, the Café Bleu. Nestled right underneath, as you can see, the Eiffel Tower. That's the structure on the left-hand side. Le Temps Bleu at the Gare de Lyon was originally created to bring visitors to Paris, the Paris Universal Exposition of 1900. This was the largest world fair ever held, and allegedly over 50 million visitors attended, though I imagine many of those were repeats because, of course, you could buy a pass for the 6 months throughout the summer that the exhibition ran. This is very more upmarket than the bouillon. The brasseries were very much designed for middle and upper middle class clientele. I'm just going to show you one close-up of one of the painted panels. Somewhere in the south of France, of course, that was where the Temps Bleu took you, to the Mediterranean. And this is showing you one of the amphitheatres, Arles or Nîmes. But the main thing is you get a good idea of the type of clientele that the Temps Bleu was attempting to attract. But the artist designed it down the bottom left-hand side, and it's dated 1905, indicating that much of the ornamentation was completed after 1900, and the painter is Magrin. So what are bouillons? Well, they are allegedly associated with a butcher by the name of Duval. He was catering for a upper middle class clientele, producing, in fact, a rather refined soup, which is what bouillon actually means. And because it's produced using a lot of fresh ingredients, it can actually take quite a long time to make a bouillon, but it's made using cheaper cuts of meat. So he wanted to, like today, he wanted to be self-sustaining. So he wanted to find a use for the cheaper cuts of meat. So that's where the idea of the bouillon comes from. So here is Paris 1878, one of the temporary restaurants created. And as you can see down the bottom, it says Le Bouillon du Val in the Parc Champ de Mars. So that area of the exposition 1878. We have a classic French waitress with some tourists. And she's looking rather quizzical because clearly they don't know what to order off the menu. In fact, it's quite easy to order off a bouillon menu, whether you were back in 1878 or today, because it has a limited menu. The idea is to produce good, honest French fare at a relatively reasonable price and often in exceptional surroundings. As we will see, the bouillon will very much become a showcase for the Art Nouveau style. So this is Bouillon Duval's Bouillon for Paris 1889. It's just to give you some idea that they were very large restaurants. They could seat, in some cases, several hundred people. And the idea was that you would go through quite quickly. This was not necessarily a leisurely meal. Your bill would actually be written on the paper tablecloth. That, by the way, hasn't changed because although the bouillon were very popular up to the First World War, they then fell out of favour. The brasseries took over, catering for a higher class clientele. But over the last few years, bouillon have come back with a vengeance, again catering to a mass market, tourists and Parisians, with a menu that many will feel has taken you back to the 1970s in terms of the prices. You can get an entree for less than €5, a main course for about 15 to 20, and you can even afford a glass of wine. And you're definitely going to enjoy the atmosphere. Before we leave the story of the origins of the bouillon, I just thought you would find this rather amusing. Here is the broth, the bouillon, in a wonderful sort of music hall, I think I would describe its song, sung here by Aristide Bruant, the famous impresario that I associate very much with the fin de siècle, the famous poster by Toulouse-Lautrec that you can see here. And he sung at l'Ambassadeur, which was the name of the cafe concert, but I thought you would be amused by the ladle coming out of the pot for your bouillon. And I think you can see here what I mean about all the things that went into it. So it's one of those simple dishes that takes a long time to create with a really good stock and then lots of fresh vegetables. It is often then pulverized, pureed and sieved. And when the bouillon first came into fashion in the early 19th century, they were often seen as a sort of pick-me-up, sort of literally from the restaurant concept to restore you. Anyway, if you head to Chartier, they are still the most famous chain of bouillon in Paris. You're more likely to have the traditional French fare of frites, steak et frites. Here, as you can see, with some nice looking butter on top, garlic butter, I hope. So this is Chartier's Montparnasse. In fact, it was known for many years as Montparnasse 1900, but it's been returned to the fold. It was the two Chartier brothers who came up with the concept of allying Art Nouveau architecture with good, wholesome French fare. They used a duo of architect and designers. So Jean-Marie Bouvier is said to be in charge of the overall scheme. And Louis Trézel is said to be responsible for the painted glass and even sometimes the tile work, but especially for the painted glass. So Chartier, Montparnasse lives up to its name in being a riot of Art Nouveau decoration. It's an interesting combination of relatively inexpensive food, but way over the top ornamentation. We're looking up here at the ceiling past one of the rather beautiful light fittings. Each one of these Art Nouveau ladies who are dancing are holding these illuminated globes. What you'll find in all of these Art Nouveau interiors is a wealth of ornamentation. But Chartier Montparnasse is a little unusual in having these very dramatic light fittings of dancing girls, very much a theme of the fin de siècle. Here's another one, as you can see. They all run down the center of the room, a long sort of oblong shape, and the two sides are divided by this screen bearing these rather beautiful figures. Here's a better view of one of them. And you can see here what I mean about dancing. They remind me a little bit of the figures designed by Agathon Leonard for Sèvres on the theme of the Tanzarine, or the dancer. The ceiling looks like it should be stained glass, but in fact it's simply painted. This is all attributed to Trézel, who was the master of painting glass. It has to be protected, obviously. It is not open to the elements, so it's more like a light box than a skylight per se. Wonderful stylized foliage, interlocking stems give you a sort of wonderful Guimard-esque. Guimard was the architect of the Paris Metro, and you can see some of his styling here. It's often known as steel metro or steel Guimard, with these sort of whiplash interlocking stems. Guimard was advised by Victor Horta, the famous architect in Brussels, to forget about the flowers, but to grasp the stem and the leaves. And it's the stems here that really dominate the design, giving you that wonderful curvilinear element that you associate with Art Nouveau at its best. Going back to an overall, I'm going to now concentrate on the fantastic tiles, which are in a what I would call a technique which we refer to as tube lining. Again, they have a three-dimensional quality, as you'll see. So we're going to look at the tiles and at the glass panels. And what makes Chartier Montparnasse again stand out is the combination of the beveled mirrors set in these elaborate wooden frames, with the woodwork in effect creating our Art Nouveau patterning. Not a straight line in the place. So here we've got the conceit of what appears to be morning glories growing out of vases. You can see in the corner here one of the painted panels by Trézel. These are likely to have been made at Sarreguemines, but we'll talk more about where the tiles might have been made a little later on. But Sarreguemines, as the name suggests, rather Germanic sounding, is right up in the southeast corner and was a major centre for the production of tiles in the late 19th century. So here's a better view of these wonderful tile panels interspersed with the mirrors, and then some of the mirrors bearing these beautiful painted landscapes by Trézel. Landscapes, as you can see here, or harbour scenes. Down the bottom, there's his name at the top, Louis Trézel, and down the bottom, more standardised, but still very Art Nouveau tiles that could have been bought from many different factories at this time. I love the way that the panels on the tiles wrap round columns. As you can see here, we've got a street scene with a church on one side and a marine landscape on the other. Again, sailboat on the right hand side could easily be Venice, looking at that landscape in the background, a little Italian Venetian scene, and a rather again pleasing landscape on the other. These are all painted by Trézel. He must have been a very busy boy, and they are unusual. As you can see, like the tiles, they are raised up. Evidently Trézel specialized in this new not quite impasto but raised style of painting. So here's some rather, again, some charming features, little birds here. So I'm rather annoyed about the computer being in the way, but if you look above it, you see a little panel of birds looking down. Again, sort of all these lovely little touches that the Art Nouveau artists were so clever at incorporating, little themes from nature all the time. Back here again, this is a sort of area almost like a screen which separates two areas of the restaurant, but I'm including it again because it's an extremely good example of Art Nouveau whiplash. And then the beautiful flowers, as you can see, arranged in like almost like cloisonne. It's like the wood is creating a sort of cellular design, which is then filled with the painted glass. So Chartier had quite an empire. So here's another one that you might like to visit, which is said to be as late as 1906. This is the Bouillon Racine in the 6th arrondissement. This is in the Latin Quarter, not that far from the Jardin de Luxembourg. It's again had an interesting history. Briefly, it became the staff dining room for the Sorbonne University before having a total restoration about 20 years ago. Again, it's by our duo, Jean-Marie Bouvier and Louis Trezel, for the painted glass. We're back to the idea of wood creating intricate patterns interspersed with beveled mirrors, but here the colouring is much lighter, all these rather beautiful soft greens. And the painting here by Trezel is on the theme of flowers. You can see them here underneath the staircase. Interestingly enough, at this particular establishment, the main dining area is on the upper floor. So we're looking along it now. I imagine that at one time it might have had more stained glass panels on the left-hand side to diffuse the light, but many of the beautiful painted flower panels by Trezel have survived, like the ones that you see here, highly stylized, set into their wooden framework. And to give you some idea of what the stained glass might have looked like, again in Tiffany style, this is all using float glass. You don't actually paint the glass, you cut the glass and fit it to the leaded cames, creating a pattern. You don't need to do anything more in terms of painted, directly painting the glass. It's all literally done with the character of the glass itself, which is often internally decorated or textured, as you can see here on these rather lovely irises. On the left-hand side, Trezel again creating sunflower panels. These are on the first floor of this particular restaurant. So not very far, in fact, from our previous establishment in the Latin Quarter area, we have another described here as the former Bouillon Chartier, as it's now the Brasserie Varende on Boulevard Saint-Germain. This game just dates to just after the turn of the century, 1904. It's again our duo, Jean-Marie Bouvier and Louis Trezel. Again, it's the same pattern. As you can see, there's a theme coming through of the mirrors, the woodwork, the tile, and the painted glass. This has the advantage, however, of a rather beautiful ceiling, as you'll see in a minute. This is not so big compared to some of the other bouillon, but it has sort of interesting sort of tucked away little private dining rooms, as you'll see. So here I'm just looking into one of these more intimate areas, but I'm showing you a close-up of one of the painted flower panels. Looks like tube lining, but this is all painted glass, courtesy of Trezel. And then the ceiling that I was promising you. Again, it's more of a light box. They're not open to the elements because, of course, they would be very easily damaged, even by very heavy rain. But one of my reasons for taking you into this little secluded area is, again, because Trezel decorated this with rather beautiful landscape panels, which you can see running along the bottom. You can also see some beautiful tiles. Again, sort of soft greens, the tiles, but the dark mahogany wood of the main frames, again, does make the interior a little darker. So here are the landscapes. These are not this impasto technique, they're raised up. These are more straightforward landscapes painted on glass and then fitted into the wooden framework. I'm always tempted to take a screwdriver with me. I could definitely do with a couple of those coat hooks. However, my personal favourite is Julien's, and this is where you will find Trezel's masterpieces. These amazing, over life-size, they feel to me, images in the style of Alphonse Mucha. There are 4 seasons altogether: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. In my close-up, you can see what I mean about raised painted decoration. Looks almost like tube lining. Trezel evidently was a pioneer of this new style. And I'm showing you the front of Julien's, and this is at the end of the Grand Boulevard on the rue Faubourg Saint-Denis. Find the big gate in the 10th arrondissement, and Julien's will be very nearby. This is opened in, well, it was conceived between 1901 and 1903. I've never quite got to the bottom of whether Edouard Fournier is owner and designer, but certainly his name is the one that is associated with creating Julien's. Hippolyte Boulanger was responsible for the tiles, and Frazel again responsible for the 4 big female panels. Let's start with the ceiling. Again, this appears to be a slightly later edition. It's usually dated to just after the First World War, but it's encased, as you can see, still in a really remarkable Art Nouveau style framework. Again, of peacock feathers and female heads. We're back to the concept of the femme fatale. The woodwork in the bar has often been attributed to Louis Majorelle, one of the most famous designers associated with the École de Nancy. He also worked on other big projects in Paris, like the interiors of the Galeries Lafayette, where he created the amazing metalwork associated with the staircase and the galleries. He also worked, this has survived, but only because we will now have the remnants of it in the Musée Carnavalet. This is the Museum of the History of Paris, which you'll find in the Marais district. We have here the interior, which was rescued from the Café de Paris, for which Majorelle is said to have designed 3 rooms in this very fashionable style. Rather like, again, the combination of dark wood, stencil decoration on the walls, and then obviously the use of mirrors, very important to make these interiors seem bigger and even more lush. Louis Majorelle worked on these interiors alongside the architect Henri Sauvage. It's one of the reasons why Sauvage will be given by Majorelle the commission for his fantastic villa, the Villa Majorelle, or the Villa Gica in Nancy, which dates to 1898 to 1900. Anyway, let's sweep you around Julien's. I have cheated here a bit because it's always very busy. I've taken some of my images off of Julien's website. Frazel's masterpieces here. So this is spring, but I love the plaster decoration which surrounds her. And again, there's wonderful coat hooks. Here's some close-ups, courtesy of me, showing you this technique of raised painted decoration. It's recently undergone, about 2018, a total revamp, so it no longer looks like it's painted the colour of nicotine. It's now in this rather beautiful pale green colour, like the bouillon racine, which we saw earlier in the Latin Quarter area. Winter is one of my favorites, so here from their website, but also one of my own images, you can see how each one of these panels is signed, Louis Trezel. I couldn't resist this rather atmospheric uplighting of our femme fatale surrounded by peacock feathers and stylized flowers rather emphasizes that French Art Nouveau is very much influenced by the Rococo, that mid-18th century style, which was so admired and I very much associate with Madame de Pompadour. That's where the curvilinear element really comes into play, borrowed by my Art Nouveau designers from the French Rococo. I do love her earphones, which are poppies. Here's a close-up. I love the way these panels are jeweled. So you can see what I mean about creating this sort of cloisonné effect, where the paint is contained within these raised areas that remind me of the cloisons that we associate with enamel work. I love the jeweling again. Looking up at the ceiling, rather perhaps a little bit more subdued, if, as we are led to believe, it was inserted around about 1920. But you certainly can't say that the peacocks are subdued. Yes, the ceiling is attributed to the Parisian mirror factory and said to have been designed by Charles Buffet around about 1920. Anyway, back to these peacocks. Okay, this isn't one of my older photographs. I'm pleased to say this is now a beautiful shade of green. Here's a close-up to show you that they are signed Armand Jean-Baptiste Segaud. And Segaud is well known not only for his designs in glass painting, but also for his posters. So I'm showing you two here. Lucette Dalvois is described as an eccentric dancer. Even more intriguing, Le Solitaire, believe it or not, was an early Art Nouveau sex toy, is how it's described on the internet, that one could get from the chemists. It's also alleged to have been very useful if you suffered from hysteria. I rather like the way that there are bolts of lightning coming out of this interesting bit of apparatus, and what appears to be a rather unpleasant looking genie is rising up in the ether. Okay, so Tresel was obviously one of those artists who could turn his hand to different projects. So here the front cover, L'Art Decorative pour tout. This, of course, dates to 1902. And then we have the image on the right-hand side, La Pluie, which means it's to do with raining. If you look carefully, you can see that she's got raindrops. Raindrops are falling across the image, rather charming. And I think the idea of this is to give you an idea of what sort of internal or what sort of interior decoration he could supply. So coming to the end of my tour of French bouillon, because this one is very much a brasserie. This was opened in 1895, and Moulin is to be found immediately opposite the Gare Saint-Lazare, and was very much like the Café Bleu, designed for railway travellers. Many of the beautiful tile panels that you'll find here are actually depicting places that you would travel to from the Gare Saint-Lazare. The man behind this is Gil Blas, and I'm going to again sweep you around some of its remarkable decoration. Many of the tiles here are attributed to Sarreguemines. So that's the big tile producing area, northeast corner of France, on the river Sarre, hence Sarreguemines. So here again, beautiful ceiling that has only very recently been restored. Again, it's going to be protected by external glass. You could not have this open to the elements. So you can see that these ceilings are a significant investment on the part of the owners of the cafe, again, to make a big statement, and how you're going to be enticed into these interiors by their beauty. So here are the tiles. So the interior here is attributed to Edouard Jean Neumann. Many of the tiles are designed by Eugene Martel Simas or Sima. And the mosaics, and there's lots of them, often surrounding the tile panels, are by Henri Bichet. And again, they're very colourful, but also very entertaining. So here, Ville de Havre is one of the stations that you might have travelled to. Out in the countryside, we're looking at the orchards. She's picking cherries, and we've got giant sunflowers. On the other side, they all look like they're just coming out of the theatre, or just in fact arriving from the station. Can you see in the background it says Arrive? Here, Saint-Germain-en-Laye is the theme of this tile panel, where you could escape to the countryside and go boating. I love the way you've got the trees' roots depicted right the way down the bottom. But this one, in fact, is just marked with the rebus for Sargoing, which you can see right down the bottom. The S is sideways for one of the main factories in this important ceramics production area of Sargoing. It's like Stoke-on-Trent. It's made up of lots of individual factories. However, I started with that idea of where, in fact, Oscar Wilde might have dined in Paris, bearing in mind, of course, that some of the places that I'm showing you were not decorated in the Art Nouveau style until the opening years of the 20th century after he had died. But the bouillon that claims that Wilde ate here is Pharamond, which is in the first arrondissement in Paris and is a little smaller than some of the establishments that I have been showing you, and is very much in the Normandy style, both in terms of exterior architecture and the food that is offering. It's supposed to be the home of the sauce normande. I'm showing you here the main area with its tiles and confession time. This is still on my list to visit. So every time I go to Paris, I try to visit another one of these amazing restaurants, brasseries and bouillon. But they claim that Wilde ate here, as did Hemingway, but he seems to have ate or eaten all over Paris. Another famous resident is said to be Clemenceau, and more recently, Mitterrand. So I'm not sure if any of this is true, but I'm hoping I've given you an idea of the flavour, literally, of what it might be like to have been able to eat in Paris at the turn of the century in one of these magnificent Art Nouveau bouillon or brasseries. I often am asked, how did I get interested in Art Nouveau? Of course, I was raised with films like Gigi. Ever since I saw Leslie Caron, I'm not sure we can have it revived, raised, as you know, to be a courtesan, but Charles Jourdain falls in love with her and makes her a decent woman. But undoubtedly it was the romance of Paris 1900, seen through the eyes of Colette, Gigi 1944, and Cherie 1920, recently a film with Michelle Pfeiffer as the aging courtesan. So if you want to get a good flavour of the fin de siècle in Paris, these are definitely two films that I would recommend, Ma Chérie and Gigi. I'd love it to be revived, but it might be in this day and age a little politically incorrect. So if you're interested in Art Nouveau architecture, I just remind you, you can buy my book very easily on Amazon. Here it is, Art Nouveau architecture. It has a section on Paris. I do touch on the restaurants, but more importantly, I touch on their decoration, particularly the use of tiles, metalwork, and coloured and stained glass, because these were the main elements that Art Nouveau used to create such spectacular interiors. Thank you very much for your time.